Hello, Thrivers. Today, I want to talk about toxic loneliness for anyone that's overcoming childhood trauma, Cptsd, or narcissistic abuse. And I just want to start out by saying that I've never been a fan of that term, toxic loneliness. I feel like loneliness is a painful enough expression to kind of admit and acknowledge that you have, right? Loneliness to me is like, when you have undergone a hunger for a long time, you haven't eaten in a long time, and you have those hunger pains. Well, to me, loneliness is like hunger pains for the soul. It's painful and it hurts. And so the thought of putting the word toxic in front of it, I was never a big fan of that, especially also because a lot of trauma, right? A lot of people that have undergone trauma or are recovering from trauma are recovering from it because there was a toxic person in their life. So to say that I have toxic loneliness, it just kind of didn't sit well with me, just to be honest. But something that I realized was helpful for me to kind of digest it a little bit better was recognizing that the toxicity of this loneliness isn't about hurting someone else. It isn't about manipulating someone, right? It's not about hurting someone else, but it is toxic because the person that it hurts is me or is you. And that's when I understood that to be like that, I understood the phrase better. Once I could understand that phrase better, then I could start really doing the inner work to work through it. So I want to first kind of bring it into the light as to why toxic loneliness is something that can be so damaging to you on a personal level. Okay, once we understand that, then we can move into what to do about it. But let's just kind of first understand it. So the first reason that toxic loneliness is so damaging, okay, is because it keeps you alone in your reality. In other words, if you had toxic parents, if you had a narcissistic parent or a narcissistic family member, or somebody at your job, maybe you never even knew about the word narcissist, maybe you never knew about how damaging those personalities are to another person, right? Most people just think of a narcissist as somebody that's really high on themselves, somebody that's, it's all about me, they're very grandiose, all of which is true, but not a lot of people understand the damaging effects that come about by being in relationships with these kinds of personalities. So let's say you were in a relationship, work relationship, romantic relationship, family, whatever it is. The narcissist no doubt invalidated your reality, right? Nothing you said about them was ever true. And they probably made sure that nobody else believed you either. So you have this reality and you've been invalidated for so long, but because of the psychological manipulation, the emotional manipulation that narcissists do, nobody knows this reality but you. Okay, so that makes you feel lonely. It's lonely being the only one that really knows the truth. It's lonely being the only one that really knows what's going on behind closed doors. But it goes into toxic loneliness when you're so focused on the fact that this is the truth and nobody believes it, that you stay stuck trying to prove your truth, often to somebody that doesn't want to see the truth, which would be the actual malignant narcissist, or the friends or family members that you have in common with that person. You want to prove your truth. And you can stay stuck, so focused on the fact that nobody's seeing it, so focused on the fact that your reality is not being validated by these people, that you don't move on. And it can literally be like an anchor that can keep somebody stuck in their life. And that's where the loneliness of being alone in your story becomes toxic loneliness, because it's now hurting you. It's keeping you from moving forward. It's keeping you from digesting and processing the trauma that took place so that you can move forward. The second way that toxic loneliness can affect people that are trying to work through trauma has to do with the fear of being alone. So if you were with caregivers that were not there for you emotionally, they created an abandonment wound inside of you, right? When you're a child and you're dealing with an abandonment wound, that is like facing death. It is so overwhelming for a child to work through that they can't work through it. So they compartmentalize it. They stifle the feelings that were associated with that abandonment. And it kind of gets stuck in the nervous system and in the limbic network of the brain. Children grow, they become adults, and now they're wanting to form relationships. But because there's unprocessed trauma in the limbic network and in the nervous system, the fear of abandonment, the fear of feeling that intense emotion that in childhood was suppressed is so overwhelming. It feels like feeling that abandonment is like life or death. That's what it feels like when it starts coming up. And the way it shows up in relationships is that because we are afraid of that emotion, because it was never processed, because it's stuck in the nervous system without any new information added to it, it's just stuck as this intense, overwhelming life or death feeling. When you're in a relationship, this is where the toxic loneliness can step in and hurt you. When you're in a relationship, you're so afraid of feeling that emotion and feeling the kind of loneliness that comes about with emotional abandonment in childhood that you can tolerate relationships that are so bad for you. And again, that's the toxicity, is that loneliness is now hurting you because it's causing you to be afraid to be you, thinking that if I'm me, they're going to reject me. They're going to abandon me. It causes you to not put down boundaries because you might think, well, if I put down a boundary, they'll get mad. If they get mad, they'll abandon me. And that toxic loneliness is causing you to stay stuck with people that are ultimately hurting you because there's this belief in your nervous system that somebody is better than nobody. And the thought of being with nobody is a life or death emotion that comes up as a survival trauma response. The third way toxic loneliness winds up hurting you is because it stems from being abandoned outside of self, but then it creates self-abandonment. In childhood, how your caregivers emotionally responded to you becomes the template of how you respond to you when you become an adult. So if you had caregivers that were very comforting to your emotions, then you learned how to comfort yourself emotionally. You learned that feelings were normal, feelings were safe, and that feelings deserve attention. But if you had caregivers that abandoned you when you needed them the most emotionally, guess what that creates in adulthood? It creates a template of self-abandonment. And when we abandon ourselves, being lonely is painful. It hurts. It's like a need that's not being fulfilled. It's painful. But self-abandonment creates a loneliness that is now crosses the line into toxic, again, because it's hurting you. Because not only are you lonely and feeling the pain of that because no one is there for you, but you're not there for you either. And so the pieces of you that are part of the unhealed trauma are stuck feeling the same fears and the same intense emotions as when you were a child. And that is super overwhelming to deal with. That being said, I just want to say that if you are experiencing loneliness or toxic loneliness, it is a normal side effect or symptom of unhealed trauma. It is a normal symptom of complex PTSD. It is not a life sentence. You do not have to live in that emotional state forever, but you do have to take responsibility to do the inner work, to learn how to stop abandoning self, and to learn how to work through these fears of abandonment, fear of rejection. And that takes time, that takes effort, and a tremendous amount of compassion. If you feel like you've been working on that for a long time and you feel stuck and like you're not going anywhere, you may want to check out the Thriver School of Transformation. The link is in the description, because that's what we do. We meet live on Zoom every week and we work through the side effects of complex PTSD, narcissistic abuse, and childhood trauma together so that you don't feel like you have to do it alone.